Absolutely. So, Carl, are you ready for this?
I was born ready.
Oh, I love this. You were born ready. So, welcome everybody. Today is going to be yet another fantastic interview on Instagram Live. Today we have the pleasure and the honor of welcoming Carl Manlan. Carl, welcome.
Thank you.
Carl works at the intersection of public, private, and civil society sectors. As a Mo Ibrahim Fellow at the Economic Commission for Africa, he focused on industrial and agricultural policies designed to accelerate the transformation of the African continent. Prior to his current role at EcoBank Foundation, he led a public-private initiative to support an African response to Ebola in West Africa. He is currently the Chief Operating Officer of the EcoBank Foundation since May 2016. He is responsible for EcoBank's social impact engagement with the communities in which the bank operates in Africa. Carl Manlan holds a Master of Public Administration from Harvard Kennedy School. He is a 2016 Aspen Institute New Voices Fellow, and he writes on African economic transformation. Carl.
Thank you, Nadia.
Welcome on behalf of Gilles, myself, and the whole Acosphere team.
Thank you.
You are currently CEO of the EcoBank Foundation. You have a wealth of experience in business and charity work. Carl, what is your story?
I think it is yet to be written, but there are probably 3 dates that are important in the 40 plus years that I've been living. The first one is 1996, because my father moves to Congo Brazzaville as a UN officer for WHO. And in that year, there is a political situation in Brazzaville that creates a tension for the World Health Organization office to relocate to Zimbabwe. And why this is important, because an event that is really unrelated at the time, I think, to my direct life, takes me to Zimbabwe in 1998. So I moved from West Africa with my hopes and aspirations of going to study in Europe or in America, and I landed in Zimbabwe in 1998. And that year is very special because the reason why I went to Zimbabwe is mainly because my father had this word, come with me so that we can get to know each other. And I think this is very powerful for a child to grow up and have this sort of distant relationship because he was traveling a lot, he was busy, and to think that the person didn't know you, yet he knew me very well. And then there's 2001, which is the year when he's murdered. And at that particular point in time, I had sort of maybe 2 questions. Number 1 was, what would I become? And I found the answer because for all his life, he kept on reminding me that my inheritance was education. And that was probably the one thing that I held on to. And because I had this idea, I also felt that he had gone too soon. And this is probably why I'd never became a banker. And I focused most of my career on health and the social aspects of development. So that's part of my story, and that's what drives me. The fact that I had a father who spent his entire life committed to the continent, and that's one of the things that he left with me, that ability to do everything that we can for the next generation. So that's part of my story. It is incomplete, but I think these 3 dates give a sense of where I am today, basically.
Wow, very powerful. Thank you so much for sharing that, Carl. What is the biggest opportunity that you have faced in your life, and why was it a defining one for you?
2012, 2014, I became a father twice. I think about that two different events, even though I became a father once when my daughter was born. But these two children brought two different aspects to it. Number one, I didn't know what it meant to be a father. And at that particular point in time in 2012, when I held my daughter for the first time, I had wished that I had my father to speak about what it means to be a father. But at the same time, I also felt that he had given me the tools to adapt to the needs of a newborn, which are basically a lot of the skills that we need in life, which is listening, because the child can speak. So you have to be able to listen to what she feels, what he feels, and help to calm them and reassure them. The second skill is about patience, because the child doesn't move at the pace that you want to. And sometimes when you're ready to go out, you open the door, you have to change the nappy. You can be as frustrated as you want it to be, but you have to change that nappy. And the third thing is about values. Because when my children were born, I was basically telling the world that I will raise children with values that can live in this world. It meant that I have to adhere to these same values so that they can see me behaving according to these values and they can learn from it. And we had a situation a few days ago when I was with the family, when my son was very upset and he pushed his sister and she hurt herself. And my conversation with him was along the lines of, have you ever seen me hitting anybody in this house? No. So if you haven't seen me hitting anybody in this house, why do you do so? And I can understand his frustration of not necessarily having all the words that he wants to express himself. But that moment is an important moment in me trying to make him understand that there are other ways of expressing himself. And he doesn't have to use his hands that way. So they are defining moments because what happens at home happens in society. And if I have to be as consistent as I am in society as I am at home, and those are, for me, very defining moments of who I am as an individual, who I am as a father, as a husband, as a professional, and as an African citizen, basically.
Wow. When I think of you, the words that come to my mind are learner, dreamer, and walker.
Yes.
How would you define yourself? And what are the effective skills you use with that reality?
You are spot on. I have a hashtag on Instagram which is called Dispatches from a Walker. And the story is very simple. When I was younger, my father used to wake me up very early in the morning, 4:30, 5 o'clock, and he would take me for a walk. And those walks, he would speak to me about what's going on in the world, what's doing in its life, at work, but most importantly about endurance, because he could walk faster, longer distances, and I was getting tired, but the message was about endurance. And I kept that. And walking is part of my routine. That's what I do almost every day without any sort of exception. When I don't do it, it's a problem. Every article that I've written it during my walks, because really that's the sort of the thinking space for me. I don't take any headphones. I don't take anything. I just walk because it allows me to observe the society around me and pick up elements for the writing. The reading is also a key part of it, because I don't define myself as an expert, but as a learner. And to be a learner, you have to constantly seek knowledge. Hence my father's point around education and why education was important. And that would be my inheritance. And those are some of the things for me that really help me on a daily basis to have a purpose, to have a sense. Because the walking allows me to listen to the pulse of a city, of the world in which I am. And it is in those moments that one's connects with the society in which we are. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Those are the three things that I will definitely use to define myself.
Thank you, Car. Could you share with us a couple of anecdotes? I don't know, 2, 3 anecdotes related to challenges and opportunities you faced in building your career?
So when one looks at my CV today and they look at the first 3 years of my professional life, 2004 to 2007, it's 3 solid years in the same organization. Those were 22 short-term contracts. And I never really worried about getting one of these contracts that everybody was chasing after. Because in 2004, I met a guy from Guyana who became a very close friend and mentor. He had just graduated from the Kennedy School. And he tells me, I think you need to go and apply to this program. So I went to read about it. And I needed 7 years of experience to be able to get into that program. That's okay. So in 2004, I went through a recruitment process internally. I was given that big contract that everybody was chasing after. And I declined the offer. And I went to Kinshasa. I went to Kinshasa because I had to understand for myself what would it mean to apply to this program 7 years down the line. And I think that is something that was a defining moment, because exactly 7 years to the dot, I got into the Kennedy School, 2004, 2011. But had I stayed in Geneva and gotten that contract, I would have never made it, because there wouldn't have been anything about me that was different. And the purpose of wanting to go to a place where which I just had is sort of beginning of this peaceful political transition with elections in 2006 was a phenomenal experience, because I could see and experience how to rebuild the country, and having the experience of locals that believe in the future of the country despite all the challenges. And I think that is, for me, that was a unique experience. The second one takes me back to when my daughter was born. It's a defining moment because suddenly I was a student in America. My wife was pregnant on the other side of the Atlantic. And I was praying that my daughter will never be born before I finish my degree, because it would have been, I think, a mess to not be present there for that moment for my wife and for her. So when I finished my exams, I went back to Geneva. And I really prayed that she wouldn't come. She didn't. I flew back to Geneva for graduation. And I arrived the day before, got my certificates. I wanted to be there for that moment. And then I flew back the next day. And she was born exactly a week after. So that's a year later. She was still too young to remember. But I had a very big party with a whole lamb that was slaughtered to celebrate what it means to be alive and to have the blessings of having a family and also having a daughter. And my son, of course, came 2 years later. The second one is a professional experience. I was in the situations where I met with high-level officials in the country. And after the meeting, I was really raw in terms of emotions and the things that were said in that meeting. And I made the mistake of really writing almost verbatim the outcome of that meeting. And because I had not slept much that night, I think the email went out around 5 a.m. in the morning. By 10 o'clock, I had a response which I copied, in which were copied a few ambassadors, a few board members, and I almost lost my job. And I was only saved by technicality. The probation period had passed, and they had not sent me a letter to say that I didn't make it. That's the only thing that saved me at that time. But there is, of course, a lesson for me as an individual, is that when you communicate to somebody, the most important thing is to understand the position in which the person that will receive the message will be. And that's a very tricky one. And I think I learned it the hard way. Because even though I didn't lose my job at that time, I was put in a cupboard for 6 months. And for 6 months, I had to think about, why did I react that way? What did I become as an individual? And is this in line with the values that I believe they are? And what is the role and the place of emotions in a professional setting? And that in itself is probably one of the most powerful lessons that I had in my career early enough. And the consequences of that were not as damaging and severe as they could have been later on.
Wow. Such inspiring anecdotes. I could be listening to you for hours telling me more anecdotes. But let me ask you this. What in your trade, your activities, make you an international public speaker? Where do you get the confidence to stand there and speak, and how do you command attention?
So, number one, I never use any PowerPoints. Now, I had a boss 7 years ago that would never use PowerPoint, and I observed him for a year and I understood why. Because he will master the subject and tell stories about African transformation and other subjects. And he was able to do this because of his ability to read and absorb. And I've learned from him. And one of the two things that I really do is absorbing and observing. There are two important elements in the person that I am, because when you observe, you are patient. You are attuned into the environment and what's happening around you. When you absorb like a child, your brain is actually now processing. And when you watch children, for a very good part of their life, they can't speak. Or at least they can't pronounce this word. But they absorb. And at some point, they start to speak and engage. And we have to be able to understand why they have been created that way, or why we've been created that way. And we shouldn't lose it as we become adults, with this wanting to always speak. And I usually, when I speak, you're getting me to speak for half an hour here, but it's usually very short.
Yes.
I was on a conversation with Project Syndicate earlier this week, and they gave me 25 minutes, and I told them no problem. I spoke for 5 minutes, and we had an engaging Q&A. Because the Q&A, the question and answer, allows me to still deliver those points without giving people a 20-25 minutes conversation. I don't like monologues. The second thing that I do is that I listen to podcasts from different subjects. Last week I was listening to a podcast that was talking about incest. And what I'm interested in beside the subject is the structure of the arguments that they make. And that is critical. I came into reading very late in my life. I disliked reading. And I remember I had a very good friend in high school who I will give some of my money so that she will read the text and deliver the content. Because I really, something, and my parents knew that, okay, this guy, you'll probably never read. Then I got to Zimbabwe in 1998. And at that point, I understood that I had to master English. And English had to become my first language. And the only way I could do this is by reading, so that I could understand the structure of the arguments, the structure of the words. And it didn't stop from there. From there, I just sort of went on non-stop. And the last thing, of course, is back to my walking. And I think that those moments where you see certain scenes of society, there are images that you can carry into the public speaking that anybody can relate to. One of my favorite examples is a woman entrepreneur that is often not seen as an entrepreneur, that is selling peanuts on the side of the road. Mm-hmm. Is she an entrepreneur? In our context, yes, she is. But in our current narrative, she's not. And that's a challenge that we face because we don't pay attention enough to the environment in which we are. And that's, for me, where I get my inspiration.
Thank you. Wow. Well, that gives me an opportunity to move to the next question. We're in 2021, and yet the theme of women in the business remains vivid and is still a challenge. What can men do to support women's empowerment in Africa particularly?
So I might disappoint you, but I have a challenge with the word empowering for two reasons. If you look at the definition of the word empowerment, the first one is power is given.
Yes.
The second one is a process of becoming stronger. So that word already assumes that women are not strong. And that, for me, is a challenge. If we think about the word leadership, and you go and look into a dictionary of etymology, it means to go forth and die. Because the root of the word goes back to the military times, when the first guy will go in front and you get the spear and you will die. That was leadership, to go forth and die. We forgot that meaning. And now everybody calls themselves a leader. But dying is not always physical, and it doesn't have to be physical. There are many forms in which one can die. So when we're speaking about empowering women, what are we actually saying? Are we saying that they are weak, therefore we need to give them power? Or we need to start the process for them to become stronger? No. I was raised by a very strong woman. My mother was a very strong woman. She was a nurse. An entire career, she was a nurse. She didn't follow my father when he left. And she gave me the tools to understand that today as a professional, I cannot have my qualified chartered accountant wife sitting at home because I have an interesting job in a different city. So it starts at home. And by ensuring that my qualified wife is working and we're making sacrifices to make this family stick together, we are giving an idea to our son and to our daughter of what it means to make a family work. And that is critical. For those that are not fortunate enough to grow up in a family environment where you have a father and a mother, or when you have parents that are taking care of that child, it almost becomes the responsibility of society to give them that opportunity so that they can understand that we are all created equal. And to now have a situation where we assume that the other person is weak and we have to give them power, or we need to create a process to make them stronger, is an issue. I understand where we are and how we got to where we are today and what needs to happen. I'm not disputing that, but I want us to be conscious of the words that we use in trying to define the goal that we're trying to achieve. Where I live in Lomé, there's a lady that sells porridge, maize porridge, down the building. Every morning she's there from 5:30. When her son goes to school, he comes and drops the second load. How do you think this child sees his mom? For this child, this mom is an entrepreneur. This mother is a model.
Yes,
and we don't pay enough attention to these models in society of these strong women that every single day make our economies turn. And if we start to think about, we will probably stop using the word empowerment and we'll just start to say, how do I invest in this business? Investing in it means that instead of eating cornflakes in the morning, you go and buy the porridge. She's not asking for charity. She's asking for a business to thrive so that the child can go to school. She can pay for it. So that the daughter can also go to school. And why not one day open a bigger plot instead of standing by the corner? So definitions of words are critical. And if we don't define them correctly, we run into problems or risk for that matter.
Carl, I totally adhere to your definition. I like the way you have actually looked at the word, analyzed the meaning, and the way you explain it. It's just so powerful and inspiring. Wow. So we have listeners from around the world. They're in Europe, in Africa, in Asia, in America. What advice would you give those among them who are wanting to get into careers similar to yours?
You know, I think I'm extremely blessed, and the career that I've had, I don't think I drew it on a straight line. It was my father's friend who gave me an internship at WHO. And that was 3 years after my father died. He remembered my father, he remembered me, and he gave me that opening. And I was in that office And it happened that the director of that department was one of the people who created the Global Fund. And he forwarded my name to the then chief operating officer of the Global Fund. And that's how I started. And after that, I took risk. You know, I went to Kinshasa when people were getting the contract of indefinite duration. I went back to study when I could have just continued. So maybe the advice that I can give is that you need to choose purpose over comfort. And that's what I did. I chose purpose. It's not always easy, but it is rewarding to choose purpose over comfort. And that was basically for me what made it and what changed everything in my life. I wouldn't be sitting here as a chief operating officer of the EcoBank Foundation if I had not left Geneva 7 years ago, even though I had probably everything that I wanted, comfort, a nice job, but I quit that. And I went to Addis Ababa with just a 1-year option, not knowing what would come next, leaving my pregnant wife for the second time. But in those moments, we have to take what it means. We have to give a meaning to the leap of faith. So you can't say that I believe in God, that I am faithful, I have faith, and then you never take any chances. Because that's where basically the miracle of life will happen. Because you tested the faith that you say that you have. And you followed the purpose. So if, let's say, 2004, when I started working, and anyone had told me that I would be going to Harvard, I would have looked at them thinking to myself, what are they smoking? But it happened because I met this guy from Guyana, and I trusted him that what he saw in me was probably real and existed, but I didn't know it existed. And I made a decision that in 2011, I would get in. But I understood what it required for me to get in. I had to leave Geneva. I left Geneva 3 times. But I had to leave and go and seek something else in Kinshasa and in other parts of the world. So that's what it is for me. It is really purpose over comfort.
Wow. I have to say wow again. Purpose over comfort. That is a fundamental advice. Now, speaking to your younger self, with the knowledge that you currently have, what are the 3 essential pieces of advice you would give yourself to start your career?
It's a hard one because hindsight is always easy. You can look back and say, I should have done this, I should have done that. I think one thing that I should have done is to spend more time with my parents and my grandparents. Because that fundamental experience of knowledge transfer, you can't replace this and you can't repeat it. Once they're gone, they're gone. And one of the reasons why I write abundantly, it's simply because I want my children one day to read what I was thinking at that time. They're still young, but I want them to understand what I was thinking about when I left them in a different country and I'm working somewhere else. So my younger self would have certainly wanting to spend more time with my grandparents and my parents. My younger self probably would have started reading earlier and making probably easier for me to understand structure and ideas. And my younger self definitely would have spent more time doing sports. Because again, when my father used to wake me up in the morning to go for the walks, I didn't understand until much later. And when I arrived in Zimbabwe in '98, he gave me a book called The Road Less Traveled by Scott Peck. And I read that book then in 2004, and I bought it again beginning of this year, and I reread the book. And it is fascinating how I misunderstood many of the things that I was supposed to understand back then. But one of the key lessons of that book is the concept of delayed gratification. And my younger self would have also thought about delayed gratification and what it means to basically be patient and wait for that reward, whatever that reward might be. So yeah, that's what I would have loved to tell myself then. But you can't go back. You can only go forward and make sure that you pass those ideas to your children or to the next generation.
Well, Carl, you said you don't like to speak for long. I'm proudly saying I for half an hour and more. We're coming to the end of this interview, and I'd like to know if you have any final message for our audience.
Embrace diversity and learn how to manage diversity. You know, this is where you get the richness of the experience of being alive.
Wow. Thank you very much, Carl. Thank you very, very much from the bottom of my heart. Thank you on behalf of Gilles, myself, the Acosphere team, and our audience. I have seen so many messages while you were speaking. The latest one is pure wisdom. And yes, Carl, you have given us so much wisdom today. Friends, we had promised you yet another really amazing interview. I believe you all agree that Carl has spoiled us with insightful advice, wisdom, and amazing, amazing stories. So next week, we are having another amazing speaker. She is the president of Women in Africa Initiative. She is a social activist. She has an incredible story to tell us. Her name is Hafsat Abiola, and I look forward to seeing you all there. Same place, same time next week. And until then, stay safe, stay blessed. Carl, thank you a million times again. Bye, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.